Hello, everybody. I am joined by James Hartigan. We are about to catch up on all things. In fact, I'm pretty sure we were meant to do this interview maybe a couple months ago because you teased something kind of terrifying on your Twitter, which was just like changes. And I was like, oh, this fool knows. Now he's got us all waiting. We do kind of know the changes at this point, but James, thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all. It's been a while, Sarah. I haven't spoken to you for near enough 2 years. It's been far too long. And yeah, I do love a tease and I love any opportunity to quote a David Bowie song. But I didn't realize, to be brutally honest, that that was going to worry some people. There was like literally one guy on Twitter who I had to like talk off a cliff. He thought that this was going to be like his entire universe was going to implode overnight. And it's like, no, it's all good. It's all good.
It's so funny because I feel like I lived basically on the EVT circuit for uh, the bulk of my adult life, as did you, and you still do, although many things have changed since then. And I do have to say, I was so happy to see the EPT live stream honored at the Global Poker Awards. I always felt
Thank
like there
you.
was sort of, a few, like you have like your American people and your Euro people, you got your people down under, the Aussies, and I was so happy to see that. And I wanted to send you a congratulations, first of all.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And I keep saying the same thing and I keep trotting out the same line that it's an award for the whole team, but it genuinely is because you've been there, Sarah. You've seen it, right? It is a traveling circus. It's a production of sometimes more than 100 people that makes that happen. But it is like a TV show on the internet. And I personally believe, and I know I'm biased, that it is industry leading in what we do. And that's why I was very happy to see it recognized. I do think more than anything, and seeing some of the, let's call it fallout after the awards, we have a branding problem. I don't think people necessarily thought that PokerStars Live was the EPT stream. PokerStars Live is more synonymous with the team that actually runs the live events. So maybe people didn't realize that's what was being honored here, but it's more than the EPT, right? Because last year we did the NAPT, we had the PSPC, the PCA, anything with an acronym was covered. So, I'm glad. I'm glad it was recognized because yeah, I think our guys work really, really hard, and Joe, myself, and the other commentators do our best not to ruin their hard work by adding our commentary.
I will say too, after having worked, in the film industry for a long time, and obviously a lot of the people who work on the show, have gigs coming from TV, coming from film. One of the things
Yeah.
that's so unique, and this is definitely a huge kudos to Francine, who also deserved to be nominated as an industry person, but is that it feels, despite the fact that there's 100 people, it feels so much like a family. And I mean, I have had coffee and snacks with the guys, the blokes who drive the trucks, from one
Yeah.
place to the next, and they are just as much a part of the family as, the DPs and the commentators. And uh, she's really done an amazing job to build something that is, so functional, but also feels so intentional and personal.
Well,
Anyways,
I
I
mean,
go
we're
off on
obviously coming
Francine.
up. We're coming up on 20 years of the EPT, right? So Barcelona this year is going to be the 20th anniversary. Francine was at that very first EPT. I think she's one of the few people who was there at the very beginning. And over the years, the team grew, but most of the people on that team have been doing it for probably 10 to 15 years, if not the full 20. And that's why I think it has that feeling of family because we just know each other so well. And it is a pretty solid unit that hasn't changed much over the years. And yeah, when you're spending that much time on the road, when you're spending that much time in each other's company, you do get to know each other well. You have the fallouts, the disputes, the good times, the bad times. But yeah, it's a good team. I love working with them still.
And I'm sure you've told this story before, but somehow I've never heard. You mentioned, I was stalking, your Twitter, and you mentioned that Francine is the person who had brought you in to commentate, who had brought you into the fold, and I had never heard this story. How did you become a part of this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, the first ever gig I did for Stars was the World Cup of Poker. I don't know if you remember that format. I haven't done it for
Yes.
like many, many years now. I had again, it's the very quick origin story. As a journalist, as a radio presenter, I got invited to play the EPT in Deauville. So my very first experience at the European Poker Tour was playing Deauville in season 1. Met various people from Pokerstars. They knew that I was a professional broadcaster who clearly had a passing interest in poker. So when they were looking for poker commentators, they tried me out for the World Cup of Poker. One of the first recording sessions I did for that TV series, Francine was the producer, and it was her first ever producing gig. She'd kind of worked her way up the ranks through kind of like logistics roles into producing. So it was my first ever poker commentary gig. It was her first ever producing gig. We were both nervous, both thought each other despised the other, and actually we both got on incredibly well. And when it came, I think Colin Murray, you might remember, was the original host of the EPT, the original lead commentator. When he became famous and went on to do much more important things than poker, and there was a vacancy, Francine very much made the recommendation that, look, I think this guy's pretty good. I think we should probably use him. And then when live stream started a year later, we should use him because he's a radio guy. He does live. So yeah, she has been absolutely instrumental in my career over the years.
Oh my gosh, shout out, girl. This is like a little Francine
Yes.
love fest we're having really quick, but it's definitely
More than
fair
happy
and
for this to be a
warranted.
Francine Love Fest. I'm on
Yeah.
board with that.
So let's talk a little bit about, we teased it at the beginning of the show. Some changes have happened both sort of in your role and what's happening at Stars. And we already seen, the return of the NAPT, I think was very exciting for all of
Yeah.
us. But talk to us about what the changes were that we teased earlier.
It's a weird one, right? Because I'm talking about something which, for most people, they're not going to give a rat's ass about because it doesn't really change anything. I'm still going to be hosting the live streams, still co-presenting the TV shows, still doing the podcast, still be on every single piece of YouTube content that gets suggested to you by the algorithm. But I will no longer be, or am no longer, a full-time member of staff at PokerStars. And here's the thing, I guarantee you loads of people didn't even know that I did work for PokerStars, that I had a staff role at the company. But for 10 years, from 2014 up until very recently, I was a full-time member of staff, and I worked behind the scenes as well as in front of the camera and on microphone, and had I wore two hats. I was kind of front of house, doing the kind of presenting gig, but also I had a kind of role as a mid-level manager in the marketing organization, and I enjoyed balancing both roles for the longest possible time. And I think the revelation or the realization that it was no longer sustainable came post lockdown when live events came back, when we returned to the EPT in early 2022. And I'm like, oh, wow, now we're doing all these events again, doing all these live streams again. We're making TV shows again. And I'm now a lot older than I once was. And this is actually really taking its toll. And I struggled with it for a year and a half, kind of like how I don't really want to kind of give anything up, but this is not sustainable. This is not going to work, and I need to pick a lane. And obviously, I was going to pick the lane which I personally believe suits my skill set better, and also it's the lane I just happen to enjoy driving in, which is the front of house guy. And an opportunity came up towards the tail end of last year. And I'm glad it got suggested because I was kind of almost too nervous to ask. And it was like, what about if you were no longer a member of staff? What if you joined the rank of PokerStars ambassadors? What if you were on the books with some of the other commentators? Because on the other languages, for example, on the French stream, Benny and you, both PokerStars ambassadors, Willow and Froggy from the Spanish side. So it's like, let's just, put you and Joe on the books along with the rest of the roster. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. And so we made it happen. I no longer am on company email or company Slack, no longer on company Zoom calls. And I know I'm saying that with a smile because, yep, it's actually a weight off my shoulders. But in all seriousness, it was a tough decision because, you work for the company for the longest possible time as well. Flutter is a good company to work for. PokerStars is a good company to work for. But I wasn't leaving per se. I knew I was still going to get to do the stuff that I wanted to do, but just change the relationship and change what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. Because often a lot of that management stuff, that corporate stuff, does stifle the creativity. So yeah, I kind of feel like to a certain degree the shackles are off.
I love that. And as someone who also does both the front and back of the house.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to kick some of that back of the house stuff to the curb and bring it to the front for mama, I also would be on board. And yeah, there's just no limit to the amount of things that need to get done. And actually, this is just something I also really struggle with, where, you know, the brass, as it were, is often like, we want more content from you. Why aren't you making more content?
Yeah.
I'm like, boo, I'm just like working on Excel documents and like interviewing, hires and training people. And yeah, it's
It's hard
definitely
to say
tough to
no, right?
balance. Yeah,
And I mean,
yeah.
I had certain days, and I remember this was when we were doing the live streams of online tournaments. So this was probably during a Scoop or a W Coop series, where I was literally kind of doing a full time job, like a full day's work from like 9 in the morning to like 5 in the evening, just doing my day job and being on calls and working on projects, and then would have to jump on to the call for the live stream, which we do from home, and that's like on air from like 6:30 in the evening until sometimes midnight. And it's like, well, this is ridiculous. And then I'm getting up the next day to start work at 9 o'clock again. And again, I would highlight the fact that I'm getting on in years, and it wasn't
Yeah.
working. But one of the other reasons why I think that I kind of was reticent to kind of like, I didn't want to rock the boat, I didn't want to kick up a fuss, and I didn't want to put my hand up and say I can't do this anymore. Partly because I think I'm quite a risk averse person, which is probably why I'm at best a mediocre poker player. And also, I'm one of those people who legitimately used to fear change. Change was like, whoa, no. And so the idea of like any kind of deep rooted fundamental alteration in my employment was very nerve wracking. And then I went through a big year of change in 2023 where it suddenly became water off a duck's back. I'm kind of like, yeah, well, if this has changed, this has changed, this has changed. Might as well just, resign and go onto a contract. How different, what's the worst that can happen?
I love those seasons though too. Those seasons of life where things just start, where you're just like, all right, let's just do this then. Like, let's just shoot the lock off. Let's do it
Well,
all.
and inevitably, it's the stuff you can't control that forces you to change your mindset. And again, I'm not trying to kind of make things too bleak, but from like mid 2022 to mid 2023, my dad died. I got divorced. I had to sell the house and move. So that there's that list of things which is like the most stressful experiences you can go through. It's like I was playing bingo with that list and ticking them off. And the last one to add, to get a full house, the
Quit your
last one
job.
was change job, right? Lose it. So it's like might as well complete the set. And so that's what I ended up doing at the tail end of 2023.
And somehow here in early 2024, you seem probably the happiest and the most content that I've seen you in a long time. It feels like
Yeah,
the changes are working for you.
they have. And that's the key thing is, in a situation where there's a lot of negative stuff going on around you, and then you realize that positive comes out of that and you focus on the positive. And that's, I think, what changed my mindset. It's like, well, just if you don't like something, change it up. And also my kind of mentality from the midpoint in 2023 was also kind of like a real fuck it approach to everything. So it's like, World Series of Poker main event, never played it. $10,000 to play a poker tournament, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And it was that kind of mentality, which I think has just, yeah, it has. It's made me happier. So I'm glad that is coming across, because I do feel more content. I do feel more balanced, I guess, than maybe I was 12 or 18 months ago.
Yeah, it does. It is coming across. I do feel it. And, of course, before we started this interview, I was trying to get the tea, trying to get everybody to spill the dish on what's been going on in your life. So I got some backstory, and someone said maybe Joe Stapleton might have introduced you
He did.
to the new fling in your life who also loves poker.
Yeah, so Joe Stapleton is the ultimate matchmaker. Yeah, it was a bizarre situation where it was during the World Series main event, which was a last minute decision to go and play. And I was playing day 1D. And as everyone knows, when that event goes on dinner break, trying to get food inside of a 60-minute window when there's like 5,000 people trying to frequent the very few restaurants in Paris and the Horseshoe, it's like, so I primed Joe. I said, buddy, can you get a restaurant, get a table somewhere text me the menu, I'll order in advance, I'll come and join you, and we'll have dinner together. And it was like, yes. And he just goes, oh, I bumped into a friend, someone I've known for 5 years in the casino. Do you mind if she joins us for dinner? I'm like, sure, I don't mind. And yeah, it was, he wasn't setting us up, but he just happened to introduce us. And clearly there was some kind of flirting going on during dinner. And after day one of the main event, I then had a rest day before day two. So went out on a date on that Friday. And second date, third date, she came to London, came to Barcelona. I've come out to LA a few times. She lives in LA. So we're making the long distance relationship thing work. And yeah, that's another reason I think why I'm very happy and very content right now. So yes, I'm currently speaking to you from Los Angeles, and that's another great thing about being kind of like free of the kind of corporate shackles is I can basically be a digital nomad, which I think is the trendy way of saying you can work from anywhere, right? So I can do the podcast from LA. I can work on all the stuff I need to work on from here. So yeah, it's working out pretty well.
It's actually like the perfect poker love story. The meet cute that just happens at the main
Yeah.
event dinner break you weren't gonna play. I'm
Yeah.
I'm on
And
it.
you can imagine me being the kind of slightly awkward Englishman that I can be. All I'm thinking about when I sit down at this table for dinner is hands I've played and what direction my stack's going in. And so, of course, like Joe's like any interesting hand histories. And of course, I'm like, well, there's a guest at the table. I don't want to bore her with like, so I raised 2.2x with kings and the hijack. And she's like, no, I'm a poker player. I'm a poker fan. I'd love to hear some hands. And it's like, great. So yes, when you have that shared interest, when you have that mutual passion for the game, it helps. It absolutely helps. But I will tell you one funny story about our first date. So I do think this worked out really well. Even though she knew Joe was in the business and had a podcast and did live streams, she'd never watched or listened to any of our stuff. And I think that's really good. So obviously she met me as a person rather than, the
The figure.
commentator. Yeah, exactly. And we happen to be like we're kind of hitting every casino on the strip, and we're like sat at like one of the bars in, I think it was Harris, and playing video poker. And obviously they've got all the screens right behind the bar on ESPN, and all the sports networks are up, and FS1 was in the bottom corner. And at that exact point, EPT Monte Carlo came onto FS1, and I kind of just nudge and go, my show's on TV right now. And of course, what's the first thing that happens at the top of the show? There's me and Joe standing on the set, like doing our piece to camera. And it's like, yeah. And so that was pretty cool. And like, she immediately takes a photo, sends it to Joe, and Joe responds, you've no idea how much I had to pay to make the barman put that on TV.
I was thinking the same thing because, poker famous is definitely different than like real world famous, and getting it on TV is like a whole other level. Good work. Good
Yeah,
work.
it
And
was it
whether or
was
not that was the
perfect
universe or
timing. Perfect
Joe.
timing. It is also just one of those things which happens in a movie, but occasionally happens in real life, and
Yeah.
that's a sign of destiny, right? So this is meant to be. This is going to be good.
It's glorious. And yeah, I mean, you and Joe have worked together for ages. Of course, your
Mm,
like ultimate, love story will begin and be connected always to Joe. And
always.
I actually was just looking back at some of the things that have happened in the last few years. Like you mentioned EPT Monte Carlo, and I was thinking, was Barney Boatman just winning in Paris? Was this sort of like the people are always asking me, what's your favorite interview? What are your some of the favorite winners and these things, which I'm always like, I struggle to come up with it. But I was thinking Barney coming on your guys' show and talking, this must have been the whole EBT Paris experience must have been amazing for you.
It was an absolute dream. And Barney's played the EPT on and off over the course of 20 years, and he came to Prague for the first time, so it's not like hadn't seen him for a while. But to see him make a deep run, to see him be the chip leader with 18 players remaining, was like, no one wanted to jinx it, right, by saying, is Barney Boatman going to win an EPT? Are we going to have the oldest ever EPT winner? And then he went on and did it. The only thing that could have been even more perfect is if he'd waited until Barcelona. If it had been literally the 20th anniversary, that he would have won. But the fact that it's happened this year, and I was very honest about it, this is my favorite EPT win. This is my favorite moment on the tour since Vicky won her second title in San Remo and became the first two-time champion. And that was 10 years ago now. So
Was
yeah,
it?
very happy.
I'm so
Very
old.
happy. I know.
That was an
Well,
amazing
especially in,
moment too. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously we talked about this on the live stream and we talked about this on the podcast with Barney. I've known Barney longer than any other poker player because before I was in this industry, before I was part of the Pokerstars family, um, I volunteered on the Hendon Mob Forum to take part in the TV show Barney's Home Games, where Barney Boatman was traveling the UK and visiting people's home games and playing in their games, and they would film it for TV. So Barney came to my place in Putney, played in my home game with my friends, and there's a TV show. And yes, somewhere buried in a drawer, I have a DVD of this show from early 2005. So yeah, I've literally known Barney all that time, and he still has very fond memories of that TV show and still remembers playing in that game.
I love Barney. He's one of my, actually, it's funny. It all circles back then to the awards, which we do also have to talk about your podcast being nominated. But he's one of the people that I always feel like, why is he not getting nominated for Twitter Personality of the Year? Because I think he is so sarcastic, he's so funny, he's so, but still like in a charming, British way. I
Yeah,
also just adore Barney and think he deserves all of the accolades.
I do wonder sometimes, and you referenced earlier on the fact that there's the classic US Europe divide when it comes to those awards, and I think that's true of the voting panel as well. I do think that sometimes Barney's humor, not all Americans, but I think a lot of Americans, maybe that is lost on them because it is very dry. There's a heavy
Yeah.
dose of sarcasm in there. But yeah, I think
Yes.
Barney's always been a great follow on social
He's
media.
hysterical.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I think the danger is this has happened in February, right? And when we get to the nominating season for next year's Global Poker Awards, it'll be
Who's Barney
January, so it'll be nearly
Boatman?
12 months. Are people going to remember that for final table performance, for example? I really,
Fair.
really hope so. Because in many ways, it was a performance. It's not just about how he played, but it's also how he handled himself and some of the one-liners that he came up with. And look, I struggle to play a multi-day tournament, and Barney is 20 years older than me. So the fact that he can play 12-hour days, 6 days straight, and still play that well, I salute him for that.
And still be witty and charming and funny and all the
Absolutely.
things also. Well, you
Absolutely.
guys, I think this is one of the things too, in my own life, also having been a part of a podcast, it's always, the poker community is small-ish, and it's always, you start circling back to the same guests and a lot of the same subject matter, and it feels
Yeah.
like you guys have really managed to keep poker in the ears funny, clever, fresh. It feels like there's always new shticks. And actually, I didn't even know. So I went to film school. I studied cinema studies. I see you're also a film buff.
Correct.
And as I was, going back all through your Twitter, is this like a section you guys do regularly, which is going through poorly designed film
Yes.
moments in poker?
So Joe dubbed it Poker Movie Monday, and I pointed out, but dude, we record the podcast on a Wednesday and it's released to the audience on a Thursday. So it then became Poker Movie Monday, recorded on a Wednesday, released on a Thursday. But yeah, and it started off where we're going through all the classics, right? What you would regard as poker movies. So Rounders, The Cincinnati Kid, California Split. And then when you run out of those movies, and obviously there were a huge chunk of them in the mid 2000s, right? When you had Lucky You and Deal and Shade. So then you just find any movie or TV show with a tenuous poker connection or where there is a poker scene. And anytime there is a poker scene, we're on board. And the most recent example is one of our listeners flagged the fact that there was this god-awful drama on British TV called The Good Ship Murder, where there's a cruise ship and every week there's a murder, which has to be solved by the onboard singer. I'm not making this up. And one of the episodes, it centers around the fact that they are hosting a poker tournament called the Pokerstars Invitational. And one of the poker players is murdered, and they have to work out which of the other poker players did it. But remember, these people wear poker faces. They lie for a living. So this is going to be a tough case to solve. And there is like, I think, one key hand of poker in this show, which makes zero sense whatsoever. And Joe had this genius idea of bringing in Jonathan Little, who is always so earnest and so genuine that Jonathan literally analyzed it like he was doing a hand history for one of his training videos, highlighting the fact that when someone bets 20,000, they're betting the exact same number of chips as the person who's raising to 40,000. The fact that players are acting out of turn. The fact that in this hand, by the way, no river card is dealt. There's a showdown on the turn and they don't bother dealing a river. And it's something ridiculous like 4 high loses to 9 high or something like that. It's woeful. But along the way, yeah, you discover that there are some really terrible movies, Money Plane, Blackbird, the Michael Flatley Vanity Project, all of which have poker scenes in, because clearly filmmakers still think that poker is cool, but not every film necessarily has the budget or can be bothered to hire a poker consultant. There's normally someone who goes, I've played poker, and they get it wrong, get every single detail wrong, which
How do
makes
you
you
guys
wonder
find
then.
these? Is it mostly coming from your audience?
Yes, mostly coming from the audience. Or you just see a trailer. Like randomly, I saw a kind of like a video of for an old Steven Seagal movie, which is about
Nice.
poker. I think it's called Gut Shot Straight. I'm like, there's a Steven Seagal poker movie? This might be the worst one we've ever looked at. So
100%.
that's going on the list. But yeah, because we are both movie fans and because it is a poker podcast, any chance we get to shoehorn in movie talk in a poker themed show, and it's something which I think is quite fun to look at how this film has covered poker and look at how bad it actually is. Interestingly, when we did our special episode for the 15th anniversary of Casino Royale, I tracked down the movie's poker consultant, who was a guy called Dr. Tom Sambrook, who used to host a live poker show in the UK. He got hired as the poker consultant, went out to the studios in the Czech Republic, oversaw the shoot of the poker game there, and he now is a full-time university lecturer. We had him on, and he found on his laptop, he actually had the full breakdown of how that last hand, the straight flush versus full house versus flush, how that played out with all the betting over the streets. And I know people think it's ridiculous, but if you look past the fact that the hands are like, it's straight flush, full house, in terms of the actual betting, as long as you take on board the fact that these people are not very good poker players, it's fine. Because just because it's a $10 million buy-in doesn't mean these are going to be the best poker players in the world. These are arms dealers, terrorists, and just, people who are clearly making money from nefarious means. So they've got money to burn, but it doesn't mean they're good at poker. They don't know that they shouldn't be limping with 8 big blinds. If you look past that, the hand actually kind of makes sense. It works. It's just improbable rather than impossible.
I like it. And actually, it's like full circle crazy. Lynn Gilmartin and Angel Guillen are like very close friends at this point with Russell Crowe. And I was
We
like,
did that
how
movie.
did you become best friends with Russell Crowe? Yeah. And she's like, they brought us on as like a consultant for a movie that he was doing. And I was like, you know what? Good job out of you, Russell Crowe. You guys got to commit to bringing these poker people in because otherwise you're going on Poker in the Ears and we're going to rip you to shreds.
Well, Poker Face was one of our Poker Movie Mondays, and I think we shouted out Lynn and Aniel in that for doing a good job. There's only one hand of poker in it, and it's a chop pot, which I kind of took as a personal tribute. But the rest of the movie, but the poker element of it was, yes, they did a good job. So I'm glad that Russell Crowe at least had the good sense to bring in people who could ensure that there was an authenticity to the poker in that. But yeah, that's another one. So normally we do like 2 or 3 a year, and we just keep unearthing them.
I love it. And this is like people always ask me this and it drives me crazy, but since I get to be the interviewer, I want to know because you also interview people. Do you have some guests in some episodes for maybe some of our audience who, might be new to Poker in the Ears? I'm sorry if you guys are, but do you have some you'd be like, definitely check out this episode. This was a good one. This was the juice.
Yeah, I would say around when Pokerstars was celebrating its 20th anniversary towards the tail end of 2021, we did some specials where we caught up with like Colin Murray, who was the original EPT host, and Luca Pagano, who dominated the EPT in the early years, and Tony Esfandiari. But there were a couple of episodes around that time. John Hamm was a guest on the podcast, and I
What?
strongly
Madman
recommend.
John Hamm?
Yeah, Madman John Hamm, and he talks about why he started playing poker, why he wanted to be good at it, the studying that he did, and the poker games he's played in. Eric Seidel, I think it's the first time that Eric has ever done a poker podcast. He agreed to come on our show. And again, Eric talking about the fact that the first time he saw Rounders, he was kind of like, well, that's not cool, because he had the reputation as being like the schmuck who kind of like bluffed it all off to Johnny Chan, but now, of course, is renowned as like one of the best in the game and someone who's had the staying power to remain relevant for 4 decades. Yeah, I'd say that some of the interviews we've done with some of the kind of the Hollywood stars, and these are normally through like Joe's kind of celebrity connections. Some of those are a good kind of starting point if you're kind of new to poker. We don't do a lot of in-depth strategy, although when we did, Andrew Brokos from the Thinking Poker podcast, which I think everyone now realizes needs to be recognized at some point at the Global Poker Awards. We did a crossover where Andrew came on to analyze some of Joe's hands. Joe was going through a period of not just run bad, but also mentally his game was just falling apart. He just had this mentality that nothing I do is right. I just get unlucky every single time, and I'm done with this game. And Andrew came on seriously to try and fix that mentality and to try and look at where Joe actually maybe was making mistakes or where he was playing right and just shouldn't be beating himself up over bad variance. And that was the most poker-centric podcast I think we've ever done. It was the most kind of deep thinking, analytical, as it would be as a crossover with Thinking Poker. But that actually worked really well. And it made me think, we need to do more of this. So I think it's balance. We have the Hollywood name to do the movie reviews. We obviously recap the events that we go to and speak to the winners of those events. But I think there probably is room for us to do a bit more poker strategy. But you've also got to find your place, right? There's a lot of poker podcasts out there now. And so we've got to focus on what we do well, which is probably on the lighter side, the more entertainment side, with the occasional dose of strategy, and just not try and wander into other people's territory or step on any toes or just create, oversaturate a particular subgenre of a genre.
But it feels, I feel like probably part of the reason that works so well and does work so well is that it's super relatable. I think almost everyone who plays poker has gone through a period or a phase, whatever your level is, where you just feel like you can't, win for losing, and to
Yeah,
to go through it and to have somebody like a third party from the outside like go through it with you. I feel like we could all really relate to that actually. I I think
absolutely.
it's always about
Absolutely.
being genuine, like you said, with Jonathan Little or whatever. I think people can almost always relate to something that feels genuine. Um, and finally, I want to let you get on with your life, but what's next for you? What's the next event coming up? I'm trying to think. Is it Monte Carlo? Is that the next one?
The next event is actually related to the podcast because next week we are going to be celebrating the 300th episode of Poker in the Ears, and we are hosting a
Wow, that's a
live show
lot.
at the Hippodrome in London. Yeah. So, but when we turned 100 in 2017, we decided let's go to the Hippodrome. Let's do it with an audience, poker tournament afterwards. And then when we hit episode 200, it was during lockdown. It was during the pandemic. So we had like Aaron Sorkin and Phil Hellmuth and Josh Molina on the show. It was like a bumper episode. We did it on video and streamed it on YouTube and Twitch, but we weren't able to do anything with a live audience. So we've decided for episode 300, it was so successful what we did 6.5 years ago. Let's go back to the Hippodrome. So 200 fans are coming to the venue. We've got some great guests lined up. I can't tell you who all of them are, but we've got a few members of Team Pro coming. We are going to go live to Hollywood. We've got a celebrity guest coming on because we are doing one of our Poker Movie Mondays as part of the show. And yeah, that in itself, even though it's a podcast episode, is also an event, and there'll be poker played afterwards. So there's a lot of planning going into that one and a lot of kind of like work still to be done before we do that. And then the event after that will be the Irish Open. And that'll be a huge part of this podcast as well, looking ahead to the Irish Open. And this will be an opportunity for us to do the live stream from the main event, but also I think Joe and I are going to be there from the very start this year. So I'll definitely play a couple of side events. I think there is like a Hendon Mob Championship. There's a €350 six max event. So there's a few low buy-in events in the preliminary days of the Irish Open, which I will definitely be leaping into. And also, the other kind of freedom I have been afforded now is I can play online on PokerStars. So very soon, I am going to be playing a major online multi-table tournament for the first time ever. And that probably will be live streamed to the audience. So pray for me.